Welcome to the Green Room, where we explore the environmental issues that green up our world. If you've ever tried to grow some of your own food in your yard, but found it challenging due to the critters that wanted to share your harvest, today's show is for you. Our guest is Barb Scholz, who has 45 years experience gardening with urban wildlife, and she's here to share what she's learned. Barb, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So we both live near the Huron River, we both have woodlands near us, and we both have lots of wildlife. And I've tried gardening in my yard, and I have had a heck of a time, even though I've put up lots of fencing and tried all kinds of things. And you have been very successful at it, so I'm so glad you're here today to share what you've learned. And to start out, why don't you tell us a little bit about the size of your yard and what you grow?
Okay. So my yard is half an acre.
Okay.
It is adjacent parkland, so there's not only woods but lots of habitat for birds and other things. Mm-hmm. And the things that I grow are just numerous, but I grow lots of vegetables and fruit. I had fruit trees, but deer were very hungry one winter, so they're gone. But I also grow flowers and lots of ornamental things. But one of the bigger things that I have in my yard is a lot of forage for bees, because I'm a beekeeper as well.
Oh, great. Well, what are the different types of animals that do like to feast on your yard? And how can you tell who's been doing the feasting?
It's not always easy to tell, but I've had deer, rabbit, possums come and go. They mostly feed on, if your compost isn't well protected, they're highly interested in that, but they like bird food. And I've had skunks, they like the grubs, but they'll also eat my bees. They bang on the side of a beehive and the bees will come out. This is a nighttime activity, and then they eat the bees, and the way you can tell, I know,
wow.
They chew them like bubble gum and spit out the, I know, it's crazy, and they spit out this kind of chewed up little bee carcass, and it's really sad. I haven't had too much skunk damage because I've put my beehives up. I have them up on a stand, so it's one of the ways to deal with skunk predators. But we also have raccoons, and because I'm a backyard chicken person, the raccoons are a big player in the critters eating your chickens, so they are very interested in chickens. So we've done lots of things for that.
You have something like a chicken tractor? What's that?
I do. Well, I'm gonna back up for a second and talk about the chicken yard.
Okay.
So the chicken coop, where they roost and where they lay eggs, and the chicken yard, which is kind of an enclosed A-frame structure that has hardware cloth on top of it, is sitting on a foundation of buried hardware cloth. And so one of the things to know about woodchucks, raccoons, any of the creatures that can dig and burrow is that they dig, and if they can't get through, if they hit an obstruction, they move to the side and they'll dig there. But they almost never will back up a full body length and dig there. So if you can do about 2 feet to 18 inches of hardware cloth buried, doesn't have to be buried very far, you know, a few inches down, you're going to discourage them being able to tunnel and get into the chicken yard. So that's been quite successful.
So do you bury it before you get to the start of it, or under it itself?
You could do either one, but I actually want the chickens to be able to dig and not get their claws kind of hooked up into the chicken wire. So the yard is open on the bottom, but the foundation of the chicken yard sits on hardware cloth that goes out into the yard on all sides for about 18 inches. And that's been highly effective. I can see lots of digging, but no successes.
And how big does the mesh need to be for hardware cloth?
What I put down is a 1/4 inch by a 1/4 inch.
Okay, that's pretty little. So
Yep.
you're going to keep out, like, what is it, voles and all kinds of stuff?
Yeah.
Okay. But in terms of like deer damage or rabbit damage, I think I've heard that if it's real scraggly, that, you know, that when they've cut into something, if it's sort of ripped up, that would be more likely deer, whereas if it's really clean, that a clean cut, that'd be more likely to be a rabbit?
Well, I will honestly say I'm not an expert on the damage, but I can tell you that a plant that is about this tall and has a a bite off of it. So it's taller forage that's happening is usually the deer. And the lower forage, that's how I judge it, is usually rabbits. And if it is soft greenery, it's usually, once spring has started, it's usually woodchuck or rabbits or something like that. Deer will eat the greenery, but they will also eat a lot of stems. They have kept in the past my raspberries pretty much pruned to the ground. They love raspberries.
Oh, gosh.
I forgot to answer your question on the chicken tractor.
Oh, yeah.
So our yard also has hawks. And dogs
Being near
from the neighborhood.
river and the woodlands, you would be.
Yeah, we have plenty of hawks, and so in order to allow the chickens to go out and forage and be almost free-ranging, I got a thing called a chicken tractor, which has wheels on the back, and it's an A-frame structure, but it has a little door on the front and a handle to pull it around the yard. And so the chickens every evening go in the chicken tractor, and I pull them around the yard, and they can search for bugs and all kinds of things in the yard. They're very happy. They get so excited when they see the chicken tractor come over to their coop area.
That's great.
And the reason for that is that chickens are highly vulnerable when they're out foraging. And I used to think I was overprotective of my chickens until one night I looked out in the backyard from washing dishes. I'd moved the chickens and went inside to wash a few dishes, and sitting on top of the chicken tractor was a hawk peering in, trying to find out how to get to these chickens. And after that I was completely settled with giving them that level of free ranging.
Yeah, that's great. Wow. And it looks good too. I've seen, it's very nice. So tell us some of the things that didn't work for you before you settled into, sounds like you've been doing a lot of experimenting through the years.
I have, and so it depends on the creature what doesn't work. So we can start with deer if you want to.
Sure.
So there's this very smelly spray stuff. I think it's called something off, deer off or deer away, or I mean, they sell it in different, under different names. And it's been a while since I used it, so I don't remember the name exactly. But I would hang little rags around my garden and spray that stuff on it and spray the plants, and every time it rained, it rinsed off, so I'd have to reapply it. But I can't tell you how many times the deer would just completely ignore it if it was something they really loved.
Or if they were really hungry.
Yes,
it all depends.
Hunger really, really matters.
Yeah.
So while it slows down the pressure of consumption, it doesn't eliminate consumption. And
yeah, if you only have, like I was trying to grow sunflowers and I only had about,
big
10 of
favorite.
them or something, and one morning I went out and they were all eaten off, so that was pretty frustrating. I guess noisemakers don't work very well, I've heard.
I tried one time a thing you put on a post that you hook your hose to, and if it detects motion, it starts to squirt in the direction of the thing that's moving. That was not very successful in my yard. It might be successful for others, but it wasn't a great success. Making noise, because deer are often out in the evening and late at night. I didn't want to do anything major noise making because of
neighbors.
Yes, I have neighbors not terribly far from where my garden is in the yard, so I really didn't want to create a ruckus.
Yeah. And then, you know, they say that there's certain things you can plant in your yard that will repel, you know, certain pests, but you've said that companion planting didn't really work for you.
It didn't. Mostly what I found is that creatures are totally capable of movement, so they just avoid that area and walk around it and eat other things. So companion planting, if you have a lot of it, might work, but for me, I found them very, very adaptable to my companion planting strategy.
When I was growing up, my parents used poison, and now thinking back on that, it really bothers me because I've heard that that just goes up in the food chain. It stays in the animal, and then like your hawks or whatever, eat them, and then they get poisoned.
Right. or if they die, the vultures will come or the crows will come and they get poisoned. I mean, it goes on. Yeah, so I tend to like to have physical barrier deterrence, and I have several strategies.
Yeah,
So,
let's talk about what did work for you.
okay, so the first thing we tried was just regular fencing, and our first big problem was woodchuck damage. And woodchucks are much more aggressive at eating foods than rabbits. Rabbits will nibble the outside and leave the center to regrow. And woodchucks are more like a lawnmower. They just take it flat out.
I know what it's like to come out in the morning and have every single one of the things you planted just gone.
Yes, gone, completely gone. So the process of putting up a fence was a good gesture, but it was exactly that, just a gesture. So all it did was make the woodchucks more acrobatic and more clever. And so they would dig under the fence and they would climb the fence and they would, you know, they would do what they needed to do to get to the food that they love. So the vegetable garden is what I started to fence, so that to keep the woodchucks out. And eventually what I discovered is I tried an electric wire around the base of that vegetable garden fence. And that was pretty good. The woodchucks do not like to get a little poke on their nose. And you can get those supplies at things like, you know, Chelsea Farm Supply or Dexter feed store.
Yours is solar powered, right?
It
That's
is. You
really
can
nice.
get, yeah, and they make those solar panels, I think, for like pastures where they can't go out and do a lot of maintenance.
Okay.
So mine is solar powered, just so that I don't have to do a lot of maintenance on it. And it is a very useful deterrent, except for one thing.
What?
Baby rabbits.
Oh, yeah.
Baby rabbits are so tiny, and they run underneath the wires because you can't have them on the ground, otherwise it shorts out and isn't useful.
They make a dash for it?
So they do. They run pell-mell, make it under the wires, and pop through the openings on my fence, which was a 2x3 grade. And I decided that I needed more measures, so I got a very fine chicken wire and put it around the bottom, and that deters the baby bunnies. They now can't get in the garden where the vegetables are. Then around I have about a third of the half-acre enclosed with deer fencing, because deer showed up and they could walk over my woodchuck barrier and my rabbit barrier, and they just walked into the garden and ate whatever they wanted.
Because your fencing's really high.
It is now.
How high is it?
So now around that third of the garden, it includes the vegetable fence in the middle and then the fruit and vegetable, and I had an orchard in that area. That fencing is 7 feet tall.
Wow.
And that really did discourage the deer. Prior to that, I had put up netting. And I'd put up wires with the little rags, and I'd tried various things. And the stuff that's called deer netting lasts for maybe a week or two.
Oh, is that all?
In the fall, when they're really hungry, they really can tear that netting down. I was surprised at how clever they were. And so you need
have
deer fencing.
like a fence within a fence.
I do.
You have the big, tall fence, and then once you get inside there, through the gate, there's smaller fencing around another vegetable area.
Right.
So it's quite a production that you've done. And
It's a fortress.
Yes. And myself, I don't have that large of a yard. I don't have much sun, so it doesn't justify those kind of measures. And you suggested to me that maybe I should consider herb gardening more.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that many of the predators just leave entirely alone. So everything, all the herbs in the more aromatic group, so the oreganos and the thyme and mints and basil and things of that sort, the creatures don't touch. I have lavender, I don't get eaten, but it's great bee forage. So if you want to have, be nice to the environment and encourage bee forage, if you plant herbs and let them flower. And the bees actually love chives, and especially garlic chives. So your kitchen will have fresh herbs, and the bees will have fresh herb flowers. And it's a wonderful thing to do if you cannot keep the woodchucks and bunnies at bay in your smaller garden. Turn that small garden into a kitchen herb garden and support our local farmers at the market.
Well, that's a good point too, because I don't live very far from the farmers market. So, but I guess deer as well don't like things like mints and stuff. So
they leave those things alone. Most animals, in my experience, I can't tell you what everybody will experience, but in my experience, I've never seen any biting or shrinking of those plants. They do like parsley and everything in the umbellifer family, so the dill and the fennel, you know, those will get mown down. So those are out in my big garden.
But there are some simpler measures that at least one person I talked to said that when she tried fish line, that the deer didn't like that, and that she was pretty successful putting metal posts, 4-foot metal posts, to protect a fairly large area. It's 50 by 20 feet that she's got raspberry bushes in, and that if she put the fish line about a foot apart all the way up the fence, that the deer don't go after, they don't want to touch it. And so that was pretty cool. Of course.
How tall did it go? How high did it go?
4 feet. So it's
4 feet.
It's kind of, you know, amazing, but
They're
maybe
great
it depends.
At jumping.
Yeah, yeah. So I don't know. You were saying that some animals will leap into your yard.
Oh, absolutely,
like the
they
squirrels.
do. Yep.
And you can't grow grapes anymore because of that. And
Yep, the squirrels have enjoyed every single grape harvest I almost had.
But one thing I noticed when you were showing me around your yard, you kept mentioning the word balance, like over and over, and you're saying some of these critters are actually good for insect control.
Absolutely.
Like which ones were you telling me?
One of my favorite friends in the garden, and they're kind of a humble-looking creature, is the possum. And the possum will eat about 90% of the ticks in their ranging environment.
Really?
Yep, it's one of their favorite foods. So I protect my garbage, but I don't shoo away the possums. I kind of find them to be a very useful co-creator of my garden space.
Yeah. You cover your compost well?
Oh yeah. The compost that has food scraps is in a separate bin, and so it has a cover. The compost that is all the weeds and garden scraps and the refuse from the chicken yard and the cleanup of the chicken house, all of that goes into a very large compost area out in the big garden space where the vegetables are. And
which is protected by the fencing.
the deer fence, yeah.
Okay.
But creatures, I've never had a creature bother it, but the chickens would love to be out there helping me stir the compost.
And you were telling me that skunks will eat and moles will eat the grubs in your lawn.
Yep.
And that the birds you want to keep for insect control as well.
Absolutely. The birds are a wonderful addition to the yard. Not only are they beautiful and their song is wonderful, but they are heavy insect eaters. So we have dozens and dozens of birds that I've documented that have come and kind of either transited through the yard or stayed and nested in the yard. So a small backyard can actually host an enormous number of creatures. So I don't take down the sumac. I leave that because that's a great bird hedge.
Oh, good.
So I have lots of habitat that I just leave in a semi-wild, untended state so that my other helpers in the garden are there. One thing that I think is worth noting is that sometimes people try to discourage wasps and other kind of stinging creatures. And one of the things that I noticed one year when I was out in the garden, there's a little green cabbage caterpillar that turns into this white little moth. And they will destroy your cabbage plants and your broccoli plants. They kale, collards, the whole mess. They turn into lacy stems instead of lovely, lush leaves. And one year I was going out and squishing them because I didn't want. I only do organic gardening, so I wasn't about to spray, and it was heartbreaking to hurt them. And so I was sitting next to one of my broccoli plants, just watching this caterpillar eat it. And as I was sitting there, a wasp flew over. It landed. It chewed the little green caterpillar in half, flew off with half. A few minutes later, it came back for the other half and flew away with it. And so I went, the expert has arrived. And so every year I have some damage from the little caterpillars, but I wait and the wasps find it, and we kind of live in this harmonious balance that I am patient with the caterpillar process, and I plant enough of the whatever kind of cabbage family plant I want that I might lose one or two, but eventually the wasps take over, and once they've eaten all those little green worms, they go away. They don't really bother my living space.
That's great. Yeah, unless you have somebody in your family that's allergic to stings, I've heard that it's really good to let any kind of, bees or wild bees or wasps to stay in your yard. The only time I've ever had a problem is if they were nesting in my stairway, and then they will come up and say, hey.
Yeah, those are usually yellow jackets. They burrow in the ground, and one year I was out weeding, and I kind of weeded through the entrance, and I was chased away from that part of my flower garden, so it was like, okay.
But otherwise, to climb a tree and get rid of a bee nest or a wasp nest is kind of crazy, because they're not going to bother you mostly. So we need to let people know where they can get this really great resource that I came across in trying to find what kind of plants that deer like and don't like. And it was on the website of the Integrated Pest Management site for Michigan State University. So I'm going to give that URL now. It's ipm.msu.edu. And if you put in the search field deer, this document comes up that gives all kinds of different plants and rates them as to how much deer like them or don't like them. So there's really a lot that people can do in terms of choices. And I just really appreciate you being here today, because as you might be able to tell, I'm a little bit of a frustrated gardener, and that you have a really great way of looking at it and dealing with positive attitude. So thank you so much for being here today.
You're so welcome. Thank you.
For an online archive of all our Green Room shows, go to washtenaw.org/greenroom. Thanks for joining us here in the Green Room.